if I found myself at a school that had a slightly more established community fundraising program, then I'll definitely run a telephone campaign, as they're really the only fundraising vehicle capable of gaining direct debits. And since these are the most valuable donations a charity can receive, because of the fact they allow you to build on that philanthropic income year on year, that would just make it the attractive option for me, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to put my cards right on the table. I have some strong views on this. Welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Thinking and acting strategically is the key to both securing the future of your school and helping to build a more equal and just world. My name's Juliette Corbett. I'm a consultant, speaker and facilitator specialising in helping independent schools. In this podcast, I translate tried and tested strategy and fundraising techniques into a language that works for schools. So if you're a senior leader in a private school and you want your daily work to feel less exhausting and more strategic, and if you want to once more feel the joy of making the world a better place through education, then you're in the right place. Welcome, and let's get started on this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode where we're talking about community fundraising for schools. And I'm delighted to be joined by a real expert in this field to be exploring this area today. And Ed Lang from Buffalo Fundraising Consultant is going to be joining us. He's been working in the sector since 2004. And what he helps us to understand is, first of all, what do we mean by community fundraising? And these are fundraising programs which allow us to engage with all of our school community in order to encourage large numbers of donors to give, potentially at relatively small levels compared to some of your major giving programs, but allowing us to ensure that we have that broad base of support for our fundraising projects within schools. So broadly speaking, Ed and I talk about different categories of community fundraising to include telephone campaigns, giving days, direct mail, fundraising events and so on. And what Ed helps us to do is to think through the pros and cons for each of those types of community fundraising. But even more importantly, how can we then map that onto what's strategically right for your school? And I often get asked by school fundraisers, right, well, this is what we're doing, and they'll lay out what they're currently doing, and then we'll be talking about what's the strategic next step. And I think the conversation that I have to share with you today with Ed Lang enables schools to go through a process which is a bit more nuanced to understand that yes, each of these different types of fundraising has pros and cons, but how can we decide what's the right thing for our school? So first of all, a little bit about Ed's background. So as I said, he founded Buffalo Fundraising Consultant in 2004, and the company now has nearly 50 full-time staff, and Buffalo is the leading provider of regular giving solutions for the independent school sector and HE as well. Buffalo has been a corporate partner of IDPE since 2006, and they're also a recommended HMC supplier of community fundraising programs. And the reason that I really wanted to get Ed onto the podcast to speak to us was because I've been working alongside Ed on telephone fundraising since about 2006, 2007, something like that, when I was working as a director of development within a Cambridge college. And ever since then, I've had a really strong sense that the approach that Buffalo takes mirrors my own, in the sense that it's about finding out what's right for the school, about working in partnership with the school and their director of development, in particular in this case, in order to deliver a fundraising program and a community fundraising program that employs all of the best practice from the sector, but is uniquely tailored to that school's community. As the founder and host of this podcast, I've been really humbled by the number of people who have told me that it's really helped them. From school heads who've rushed up to me at conferences and told me how it's been a real guide for them through tricky times, through to experienced directors of development who have said it reassures them that they're on the right track. So thank you for listening and for all your kind comments along the way. If this podcast is helping you, then I invite you to join the 300 people who have asked to get my weekly emails. That way you'll hear about each episode as it's published, as well as the special offers that I only tell people about when they're on my mailing list. So to get my weekly emails, you can go to www.consultjuliette.co.uk/sign up. So without any further ado, let's listen to our conversation with Ed Lang. So welcome, Ed, to the Independent School Podcast. It's fantastic to have you with us today.
Hi, Juliet. Yeah, absolutely brilliant to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So we're going to be talking about community fundraising. So to kick off our conversation, what I'd really like to get down to is almost like a definition of what we mean by community fundraising. Can you give us a bit of an explanation for what you mean when you use that term?
Yeah, sure. Well, every school, I suppose, has a diverse community that includes pupils, staff, alumni, current parents, past parents, and friends as well. And all of these groups have a connection to the school, which means there's an opportunity to fundraise from them. I suppose the big gifts, the transformational donations, come from major donors who require ultra-personalised asks that will be conducted during face-to-face meetings. But schools only have a small number of potential major donors. And so the question is, how can the remaining 99% of your community be engaged with your philanthropic mission? Having a community fundraising programme gives you a much broader sort of fundraising reach and allows you to showcase your mission and successes to everyone. Since people lead really busy lives, it's really down to the school, and they need to make the effort to explain and educate if they want to keep their community engaged. So a successful fundraising programme will be a regular reminder of the impact past support has made, which will generate new donors while at the same time improving current donor retention rates, so that giving to the school sort of becomes a habit rather than an sort of infrequent and unpredictable action. And gaining lots of smaller donations like these also provides you with a healthy pot of unrestricted income that can be used where the need is greatest. And finally, community fundraising will help you discover new major donors. It will help you close major gifts from known donors, and it can also help you develop future legacy prospects.
So I love the idea that we're talking here about broadening the fundraising base. We've got this sense that everybody can get involved, and we want them to be able to get involved at whatever level they're able to give at. And I think I'm particularly interested in this connection between the community fundraising. You said there about it can also help you in your major gifts programs and your legacy programs to kind of discover people, kind of stumble across them by accident rather than strategically kind of identify them in your database. And then closing major gifts as well, and thinking about how it connects through some of those challenge gifts, some of those matched gifts. Is this an area that you think, if people are going to be strategic, you're seeing community fundraising sitting alongside some of those other programs around major gift programs and legacy programs, I assume?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key. The major gift program works side by side with the community fundraising program. It's probably pretty easy at the start to identify who the obvious major donors are, but there'll be many others there who aren't sort of waving the flag as proudly. And so the community fundraising program helps you discover them, helps you get them engaged and get them bought in. And then obviously you've got the opportunity to, move them towards that major gift.
And I think as well that the frequency with which major prospects ask, well, is everybody being asked? They're just looking for the fact that everyone's being asked to do their bit. And they feel reassured that there is this community fundraising, kind of a broad base of fundraising happening alongside targeted face-to-face asking of some of those major prospects as well. So I think it is all part of it's all part of a strategic fundraising program, basically, isn't it? And I love as well that you mentioned there that the fact this is about new donors and retention rates. And I think this is really important for people to understand. This isn't just something that you can do once. Even if you get direct debit regular donations, there's a stewardship, there's a kind of a job to do in retaining donors as well as generating new donations. And so all of that is encompassed within community fundraising, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's it. Donors want to trust the charities that they support. And I think it's not great practice to go and sort of start up a community fundraising program, because maybe you've got a capital project you want to raise some additional funds for, to ask them all to make donations and then to basically drop them and not to be in contact, not to keep them updated with the progress of the capital building, to thank them for their continued support, and to keep that engagement going. So if that happens, people will sort of feel it, and they'll think, well, I didn't feel that loved by that charity. And so there are many other charities out in the UK who are vying for their gifts, and so they will try a different charity and may feel more love from them, and you've then lost that alumnus forever.
And it is about emotion, isn't it? I mean, you use the word explain and educate, and that is obviously what we're trying to do, but it's creating that emotional connection. And you're right, we have to make our donors feel loved. That's really important if they're going to continue to support the cause.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's with education fundraising, it's pretty unique because individuals typically give to charities that are sort of quite current in their lives, whereas giving back to your old school, that's something that's in your past. And so the big challenge for the schools is to say, well, actually, you came and got your education, but we're not in your past, because we are sort of helped you make you what you are today. And when people understand that and can see that perhaps the school they went to helped them discover some life passions that they've got, then they go, gosh, it was such a sort of influential few years I was there. Of course, I should be supporting that charity to help give others, individuals, the opportunity to have that experience.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got this sense that community fundraising is about asking a broad base of people to give what they can. We've talked about the fact you need to explain and educate and inspire them to give. So when you come down to the fundraising methods, what are the options for community fundraising that are available to schools?
Okay, well, I suppose there aren't a huge number, but I think that's actually good news, because it probably makes it a bit easier for schools to work out which fundraising vehicle is right for them at any particular moment in time. So the options typically available are telephone campaigns, giving days, direct mail, and perhaps fundraising events. Using events to help fundraise, that's been happening for well over 100 years, and this is still very popular fundraising activity that mainstream charities use. They will encourage the public to join an event like a marathon, for example, and to raise money on their behalf. Fundraising events within the education sector are usually dinners or auctions, as your community sort of won't necessarily feel comfortable asking their own friends and family for funds for their own school. Direct mail campaigns, they've been around since, I suppose, computers started becoming affordable in the 1970s, because letters could suddenly be printed sort of en masse for little cost and sent out to everyone. Telethons then came along. They've been a key fundraising tool since the early 90s. And then giving days are the most recent fundraising vehicle that really superseded email campaigns. And they've probably been around for nearly 10 years now.
It's interesting, isn't it? We think of giving days as being the new fangled thing to do, but actually it's pretty well established, coming across mostly from the States initially.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it sort of slightly ages me when I say that, because I sort of think it's new and then realise it's actually a decade old probably and been going for a while. But I suppose it's all relative, and compared to telephone campaigns, direct mail, it still feels new for many schools who have never tried doing one.
Yeah, so giving days, I would say, they do feel new still, but I think it's quite reassuring to know they're based on a really strong body of best practice. They're not new and experimental, they're new and exciting in that sense. So we've got these 4 different areas. We've got the events, direct mail, the telethons, and the giving days. So is there an outright winner, if you like, in terms of which is most successful for schools?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we get asked that a lot. And I suppose you end up being a bit annoying and giving a sort of a politician's answer, because it sort of depends on how you're going to define success. Basically, each of those fundraising vehicles has their own strengths and unique characteristics. So if you want to draw people back to the school, perhaps for the opening of a new building, then a fundraising event could be an effective way to do this for a small group of select individuals. But if you wanted to launch a new fundraising initiative, then a direct mail campaign would allow you to get the word out to your whole community with relative ease. However, direct mail campaigns are probably the most passive form of fundraising, and so very few donors will be gained from this method. Telethons and giving days, they involve a much more direct approach to asking, and they are both successful because they make giving really easy. So if engagement with your alumni is going to be a key measure of success, then I'd say telethons are ideal, as you would use a small team of recent leavers, and they would have hundreds of one-to-one conversations within the space of just a few weeks with alumni. And the alumni will enjoy hearing insights into life at their old school. And again, you will discover through these conversations potential major donors, legacy pledgers, or even those who are happy to be career mentors. And I suppose on the other hand, if engagement with your whole community is what you want, then a giving day would be ideal, because really for a giving day to be ultra successful, you want the whole school, which includes students and staff, to be included in it and to join in and celebrate being part of your unique school. I suppose in terms of amounts raised, telethons and giving days can be fairly similar. I'd say giving days are probably a little more extreme in terms of what they raise, because they're a slightly more passive form of fundraising and rely on your community to respond to the emails that are being sent to them. So if you had a cold community, that could result in only 100 or so donors giving a relatively small amount. Whereas with a telethon, you have the opportunity to discuss the amount that the donor would be comfortable giving. And this leads to hopefully lots of regular direct debits being gained. And direct debits are just so hugely valuable to charities, as they provide a reliable and sustainable income stream that can then be grown year on year. I suppose, however, this does sometimes mean that a telethon might actually not raise a huge amount in year one, but when counted over 4 years, those direct debits do quickly add up. And that's why the average gift from a telethon is much higher than from a giving day, which generally gains single donations. So if I had to choose one fundraising vehicle, and I was at a school that hadn't previously done much fundraising, I wouldn't go for a fundraising event. I've just seen how stressed they make people. And also I've heard too many stories of the amount being raised from them only actually ending up matching the cost of putting them on, which would be fairly demoralizing. I'd probably also shy away from direct mail. It's too passive to be an effective form of fundraising. I'd only expect a few checks to come back from it, and the success or failure of the campaign would just be down to how many zeros were on the end of each check that's received. And that's, just down to luck, which would be a bit scary. So I think I'd probably go for a giving day, because this would allow me to engage the whole school community, get the staff and students learning about why the school needs to fundraise. And I'd be really confident that the email addresses we have for the parents particularly, but also alumni, would be accurate. And, I know the parents are going to be highly engaged. The alumni will be a bit more unknown, I expect. But I would be confident to get, a few hundred donors from those groups. However, I suppose if I found myself at a school that had a slightly more established community fundraising program, then I'll definitely run a telephone campaign, as they're really the only fundraising vehicle capable of gaining direct debits. And since these are the most valuable donations a charity can receive, because of the fact they allow you to build on that philanthropic income year on year, that would just make it the attractive option for me, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to put my cards right on the table. I have some strong views on this. I have in my role as director of development, I have inherited fundraising events, which I have then run and seen firsthand the amount of time and energy that goes into running. I was doing kind of auction based kind of dinners, kind of combination of ticket price and the auction going towards the donations for the bursaries. But it's not just the amount of time you take, it's the number of favours that you pull in getting those auction prizes. And when you pull in those favours from people, it then can hamper to what extent you can go back to those same people and ask for a significant donation. So I really don't like them. I'm really not a fan of them at all. it's interesting to hear you say there that you've come across stories as well where once you've taken all of the costs into account, especially if you take staff time into account, it's not really producing a massive return. So I'm really not a big fan of fundraising events. I think on the direct mail, again, I've seen such low response rate. So direct mail, just for anyone who's listening who's not quite sure exactly what it means, when you send things in the post, so it's brochures, letters, postcards, things like that. On its own, it has a minute response rate normally. And you're right. I love the way you say there. It just depends on how many zeros on the end of those few checks you get. It does feel like luck. And in actual fact, when it comes to things like legacies, I've heard of like zero kind of response rate to some legacy appeals that are going just through direct mail. So it can be really, really underperforming in terms of return on investment, which then brings us down to telethons and giving days. One of the things you mentioned there, and you mentioned it earlier on, was that these have replaced email campaigns. So is doing an email campaign that's not attached to a telethon or a giving day, is that still a live option, do you think? Or is it underutilizing the resource that you might have?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'll just maybe pick up a couple of points, Julia. I think the direct mail as a fundraising tool, I totally agree with you that the response rate is very low. I do feel they have a place though, and so we do often link direct mail campaigns with a giving day and encourage a school to send out a direct mail maybe a month or so before a giving day happens, because I think they're pretty good at promoting things. If you can send some nice literature out. People get so little through their door these days that actually a letter is quite exciting again. You know, it used to be that we were all fed up with junk mail coming through the letterbox. Now we've all got emails, we know exactly where that junk mail goes. So post, I feel, has a place, and it can hang around the house for a few days or a few weeks even, and sort of slowly sink into the subconscious of you know, that of what it is, even if it's just the branding of the school. So I think, you know, letters have a place. In terms of your point about email campaigns and, you know, they've been sort of superseded, I think not necessarily for the telephone campaigns, it's more with the giving days, where a giving day has evolved from the email campaigns. I think when I first started in the sector, you know, I'd go to conferences and people were talking about how email campaigns were going to replace direct mail, and this was brilliant because there was no postage costs, and it was so exciting. And then a few years later, the conferences had evolved, and people talking about these magic mail merge fields that you could put in to make it personalized, and it would feel like, you know, you're actually speaking to them directly. And over the years, they had to get more and more sophisticated, these email campaigns, because you know, the general public got used to them, and sort of they started getting bored of them. So you had to sort of do the next best thing, and that might be to then integrate a video into the email campaign. And I suppose they kept going, and we now have giving days, which are essentially a mix of an email campaign with using social media to promote the fundraising activity, and then a giving day platform which you drive everyone to make the donations. And giving is more fun. It's more sort of gamified. Yeah. So email campaigns, I really people still try them because they're quite tempting, because essentially, you know, you think, oh, it's free, it's just my time to develop it. I can then send it out with a link to give. But the response rate from email campaigns, you know, will match the response rate or potentially worse than the direct mail campaigns from direct gifts.
So I think the lesson that I'm drawing from that is that actually by having giving days, but also the telephone campaigns, it creates an urgency and an excitement around a particular event that's happening. And then if you've got some direct mails connected to that to build excitement and build awareness, then that can work. You've got emails as well that are building excitement and awareness, but in a way it's not using any of these techniques completely solo. It's the fact that the telephone and the giving day, the best practice structures that are being developed, incorporate the direct mails, the email, the social media platforms and so on as well, to become a much more comprehensive approach to what we're doing. Yeah, absolutely.
There's just so much noise, isn't there, in the environments that we live in now, that to get heard, you've got to use all of the channels available, so that your busy community will notice you. And if you just rely on one channel only, it's too easy to get overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing you mentioned, which I'd love to dive into in a bit more detail, you mentioned that if you're looking for regular giving, the telephone campaign is the route to take. Giving days are great at creating excitement in a whole school community, but they're not as good at creating that direct debit regular giving. They're better at creating one-off kind of single gifts. I wonder, is there an inevitability about that? Or is there a way, do you think, in future that we could see giving days being more and more geared towards generating regular giving through direct debits? Because that seems to me like that's the nirvana. If we can find that way of doing it, then that would be really exciting. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, and we have been trying. So we can have match challenges where, you know, if a donor gives on a giving day and gives a regular gift and sets up a direct debit, it's going to unlock a big challenge if we can get 10 people doing that. And we've had these giving days and they'll get 300 donors and we'd struggle to get 10 people giving a direct debit. I think partly the sort of, you know, they're called a giving day, so it feels more instant, which potentially doesn't help. But really, why telephone campaigns are so good at getting direct debits is because you're just having a conversation with an individual. So you may ask someone to give, you know, would they feel comfortable giving £20 a month? And if they're not, it's not the end of the deal. You can sort of, you know, explore why that is and find a level that they do feel comfortable. If they are passionate about the school, perhaps it's £5 a month that they would feel comfortable giving. Well, that's brilliant. You know, if they feel comfortable doing that, that's going to make a huge difference if we get hundreds of people giving that level. And when they understand that, they feel comfortable to set up those direct debits. And it's just difficult to have that type of communication through emails and sort of the more passive approaches. It needs that human touch, I think.
Yeah, interesting. I think that's one of the areas that I'll be really interested to watch as we go forward, as to whether or not, as people get more used to giving days, and the messaging maybe can become a bit more nuanced about the impact of regular giving. But yeah, absolutely, I can see that's a bit more of a challenge for a giving day than in the telephone campaign, which is a much more interactive conversation between the caller and the recipient. So in summary, so a school needs to decide what they're going to value most from fundraising. So they've got kind of a couple of options on the table, and to put it in a very summary form, the giving day more focused on the whole school community, probably less regular giving or one-off gifts, and a real sense of kind of excitement from everybody getting involved. Telephone campaigns, fewer people involved, but a much deeper relationship building exercise, especially with that kind of alumni connection to the callers, more likely to result in regular giving and direct debits. So if you know what you're going to most value from fundraising and from the campaign that you're planning, is it as simple as just deciding between those two and then just going ahead and doing it? Is it as simple as that?
I suppose in an ideal world, yes. But I think the size and the quality of the school's database may mean that the school's sort of preferred fundraising activity just isn't viable. I suppose, let's give an example. Telephone campaigns require a database of up-to-date telephone numbers. Now, this isn't usually, I suppose, a problem with parents' contact details, but what about the alumni? Are their phone numbers regularly checked and are they updated? Telethons also have various fixed costs as well, such as training the student callers to be fundraisers. So it's going to cost the same to train 6 students as it does to train 16 students. So if you I suppose you'll need at least 2,000 prospects, alumni and parents, to make really the economies of scale work for a telephone campaign. Also, the one-to-one conversations that you have during a telethon are relatively expensive to deliver. And so even if you do have a database of, let's say, 3,000 prospects with phone numbers, you might still find that fewer than 2,000 are actually really suitable for a phone call. I suppose just consider how likely is it that a 20-year-old alumnus will give? Probably not very. And so the cost of calling them will likely exceed what actually might be raised from that phone call. But it isn't just, I suppose, the database that might influence what you do, as the experience and resources of the development team at the school as well, and the engagement of the senior leadership team, that's also really important. Telethons are pretty structured events, and so really minimal input is needed from anyone outside of the development office, and they can be delivered. because of that structure. So a school with limited development resources or experience, yeah, great, you can deliver a telephone campaign. I expect you'll probably have to bring in some consultancy support for it, but it can be done. With a giving day, ideally, you do want that whole school community involved, which includes the staff and students, ideally competing in challenges and events and having a bit of fun. So there's a lot more moving parts with that, which requires backing from the top to make it a success. And again, the development team doesn't need to have any giving day experience to put it on, but they can get some external help, I expect, with that as well. But the development resources that are required to deliver the best giving days are probably larger than when doing those telethons. So you can have your idea of what you want, but I think then you need to look, well, the practicalities of delivering it, does that still make it the best option?
Yeah, and that's quite a nice checklist there. You've got the data, so looking at the quality of your data and the type of data that you have in the school and the scale that you're operating at. There's the development office team and the resource that you have within that team. And then I like this idea of thinking about senior leadership team buy-in as well. So obviously you're going to need senior leadership team buy-in to do any of these things. Clearly you need that to have a successful fundraising kind of culture of philanthropy in your school. But actually with a telephone campaign, it's a little bit more you get sign off and then they leave you to it in the development team. Whereas for giving days, actually you need sign off, but then active participation. So I think those three areas, it's quite useful. And do you have any tips for directors of development who have a clear sense about what they want to do, but they would need to get resourcing for this? And in terms of explaining to senior leadership and getting buy-in, do you have any tips for development directors who are trying to go through that process of explaining all of these kind of different complicated options and moving parts?
Yeah, I think that's it. The development team in a school is generally pretty small, and so resources are always a limiting factor. And so to take on a fundraising activity like a telephone campaign or a giving day, they're big events and they take months of planning to deliver them. And so you do need to scale up the resources. And because I suppose schools will do these relatively infrequently, to actually have a staff member with the skill set to deliver it is quite an expensive way of going about it. And and that's why consultants like Buffalo exist, because we can come in and we bring the expertise to deliver that specific project for a few months to support the team, to sort of ask all the questions that need to be asked to make sure it doesn't get sidetracked or go down sort of rabbit warrens. So yeah, I think I think getting the resourcing right, but it needs to have the buy-in from the senior leadership team, that it's sometimes not great to just try and do it in-house. That absolutely, you can keep the costs down, but it's then what is lost. You've only got a limited number of parents and alumni, and once you've asked them, that's it. You can't go and get any more. And so, like you said earlier, of why the events you find quite frustrating, doing those auctions. Yeah, you get a major donor to give you an auction price, but if they think they've done their bit now because of that, and you can't ask them for a gift, there's a huge amount that's been lost potentially from it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And actually, I'm a big advocate of bringing in consultancy support and for these specific tasks, because it would be crazy to upscale a development office internally in the early days. Maybe when you're a very mature function, it gets different, the equation's different. But for most development offices in schools, they're too small to scale up to be able to do this on a regular basis. And yet you need that support. And if you're using consultancy support as opposed to fixed term contract staff coming in to increase the staffing for a set period of time, it's the expertise and the best practice. And this stuff does evolve over time. I mean, Ed, you and I were running telephone campaigns, 2007, 2006. I think I was the first one we ran together back in Newhall in Cambridge. And the techniques have changed enormously since then. And even a director of development that's keeping up to date with all of the changes, actually that best practice is evolving every single time. Yeah. That Buffalo is running one of these campaigns, and so bringing in consultancy support, I think, is a very good use of school budgets. For this.
And it's not, and I suppose it makes sense, that, doesn't it? Because a school might run a telephone campaign at most once a year, whereas Buffalo runs 70 odd a year. We run 40 odd giving days a year. So the speed at which we learn and evolve those products is going to be much quicker than an individual school can. And that's really the value we bring. We can say, look, we've learned some really interesting things over this last year since we last worked with you. Here's what's working at the moment. Let's get this built into your program. So
exactly. And then combining that with the Director of Development's knowledge of their community and listening to the latest thing that's happening and that's working elsewhere and thinking, okay, I'm going to tweak that slightly for my community, but that's fine. It's the partnership. And I think whenever you're thinking of working with a consultant, it's finding shared values and shared outlook on life that's really important. And I suppose, other consultants are available, but Buffalo has provided a very close match to my values and approach, which is why I've used you kind of throughout my career when I was within schools and recommend you now, because it is that sense of commitment to the community that really comes through what you're doing.
Yeah, and absolutely. And as you said, we've been around for a good number of years now doing this, and it is a small, close-knit community, the education fundraising sector, and that's what makes it great, because we all know each other relatively well, and you've got to get on. So for us, these projects that we do, it involves months of work with your clients. Well, you want to have a nice time doing it as well. So for us, the relationship that we have and the trust that we build is really key at the start. To ensure that, I suppose at the end of the day, our role is trying to make our clients look great. We'll do that by delivering successful campaigns for them. So if we do that, everyone's happy. That's always been our philosophy.
Absolutely. Real partnership approach. Fantastic. So I've got a final question, and I want to be fast forwarding a number of years from now. What direction are we heading in terms of community fundraising? What might, if we think about a really advanced community fundraising program within a school, what was it going to look like in a number of years' time, do you think?
Well, I think there are several schools that are probably getting pretty close to this point at the moment. And they have, I suppose, what we call multi-channel fundraising programs. As I've previously said, each fundraising vehicle that we've discussed has its own strengths and weaknesses. And so you want to ideally have a mix of fundraising activities so that you can benefit from the strengths of each of them. People generally have a sort of preferred way to donate. And so the multi-channel approach means that everyone can give in a way that they're comfortable with. So multi-channel fundraising, it also allows you to ask your community to give more often. And as you'll be using different channels to do it, people find this more accepting. If you imagine, let's say, you want to ask people 3 times a year and you decide to run 3 telephone campaigns, you're going to upset someone by the time you've phoned them for the 3rd time that year. However, if you did 1 phone call, 1 email, 1 letter over the course of the year, that's absolutely readily accepted. And so you've managed to, get away, in inverted commas, of asking them to give 3 times during the course of that year. And the rule is always the same here. The more times you can effectively ask your community to give, the more you'll raise and the more donors that you'll gain as a result of it. So the frequency of these events in your multi-channel fundraising program of the future, that's going to depend really down to the size and the warmth of your community. As I said, those schools that are already pretty much here with this type of stuff are the bigger schools. So schools that have a big and a warm community, they might run a telethon and then 6 months later follow that up with a direct mail and a Giving Day campaign, and then repeating this cycle annually. Those with smaller communities, they might deploy a Giving Day 1 year and then a telethon the next, and then repeat that cycle going forward. I suppose the final point I want to make is that, if you don't ask, you don't get. You're not going to raise anything. And although we might be in or near to entering a recession and the cost of living crisis is ongoing for us at the moment, it doesn't mean that a school's need for, let's say, bursaries has diminished. If anything, the importance of them may have gone up. So schools really need to continue to make their case and ask their community, even in the tough times, as those that have the ability to give will do so. And in fact, we saw this during COVID times, we found that donor acquisition, so that getting new people to give for the first time, and the average gift that people gave increased during COVID, because communities really understood the need and the importance to come together and to start helping one another.
100%. Absolutely agree with you. And it's actually it's in difficult times that communities can come together in a much more meaningful way. And so when you can share that case for support, that inspirational reason why, I do think bursaries are easier at a time like this than a building project, although building projects might have connections through to community access, community partnerships and so on. But explaining why it's really important to people to give now, because others are really struggling, and education is one of the ways that we can kind of build a more equal world, really look at sustainable growth in our economy and looking forwards to a more sustainable world in terms of climate change. Education is a linchpin of all of that. And so making that case for support, even in difficult times, that was true during COVID, it's true during cost of living crisis, it'll be true again in the next crisis that occurs, 5-6 years from now, whatever it might be. We have to keep asking. I completely agree with you. And I like the way you've set out there a model for schools some of them to do now, but many schools to aspire to, that rhythm of that multi-channel fundraising, combining the giving days, telephone campaigns, direct mail, and kind of thinking about ways that all of this can be combined into a rhythm that's right for your community. But you have to ask, otherwise no one will give.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a lovely word, that you use there, rhythm. I think that's it. If we want to get the community into the habit of giving, well, the best way to get a habit is to have a rhythm. Yeah,
exactly. And you'll get some people, those who are paying attention, thinking, oh, where was the telephone campaign this year? Oh, I must have missed it.
That's the dream.
I wasn't in it. I missed it. That's the dream. We can all aim for that eventually. So Ed, thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. How can people get in touch with you if they want to find out a little bit more about Buffalo and what you provide to support fundraisers?
Sure. Well, obviously, Google Buffalo Fundraising Consultants, and we'll pop up with our website there. But if anyone wants to contact me directly, I'm on LinkedIn, Edward Lang, or you can email me using marketing@buffalofc.co.uk.
Perfect. We'll put those links onto the episode notes as well. So if you're listening in on one of the podcast apps, you can just click straight through. Thank you so much for your time today, Ed. I think it's really important that you're providing us with some structure to think about community fundraising in a strategic way. So thinking through the different options on the table, so those telephone campaigns, giving days, direct mail, fundraising events, thinking about which options combine strategically for your school and what rhythm you want to deliver those in, and getting senior leadership buy-in and the resource to use a consultant to accelerate the best practice. The way you're doing this within your school is really important as well. So thank you, Ed, for your time today. Fantastic to have heard your thoughts today with us.
Great. No. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been lovely speaking to you. And I hope that, the answers I've given help, I suppose, demystify the world of community fundraising and multi-channel giving.
Exactly. I think they have. Thank you so much, Ed. Thanks for listening to the Independent School Podcast, the podcast that helps senior leaders in private schools to think and act more strategically, both because they want to secure the future of their school and because they want to help build a more equal and just world. You can listen in everywhere that podcasts are available. And if you want to catch up on previous episodes or follow any of the links that I've mentioned today, just head over to www.consultjuliet.co.uk/podcast.